Cobra begins in Los Angeles, where a violent criminal organization has created a growing atmosphere of fear throughout the city. Ordinary police officers struggle to understand the full extent of the threat, because the criminals operate with unusual discipline and appear willing to murder anyone who interferes with their plans. The group is not interested in ordinary street crime alone. Its members believe society has become weak and corrupt, and they want to create a new order built around fear, violence, and absolute control. Behind their seemingly random attacks is a much larger plan, one that will eventually place an innocent woman at the center of a deadly police investigation. Lieutenant Marion, known throughout the police department by his nickname Cobra, is one of the officers most willing to confront violent criminals without hesitation. He has developed a reputation for using unconventional methods and refusing to waste time with suspects who pose an immediate threat to innocent people. Cobra does not behave like the typical detective who spends hours negotiating with criminals. He believes dangerous men understand only strength, and when someone begins threatening civilians, he moves quickly to stop them. His colleagues sometimes consider his methods excessive, but Cobra has repeatedly demonstrated that his instincts are usually correct when situations become violent. The department receives information about a dangerous armed criminal holding people hostage inside a supermarket. Officers arrive and attempt to contain the situation, but the suspect quickly demonstrates that he is prepared to kill without warning. Cobra is sent inside because the situation has already escalated beyond ordinary police procedures. He enters the building knowing that every second increases the danger to the hostages. Instead of negotiating endlessly with the gunman, Cobra studies the environment and waits for the right opportunity to strike. His approach is direct and extremely aggressive, but his priority remains protecting the civilians trapped inside. Cobra confronts the criminal and immediately takes control of the situation. The suspect attempts to intimidate him, expecting the police officer to hesitate because of the hostages. Cobra refuses to show fear. He understands that allowing the criminal to control the conversation will only give him more opportunities to hurt someone. The confrontation quickly turns violent, forcing Cobra to act before the situation becomes even more dangerous. His actions demonstrate why some officers consider him one of the department's most effective but unpredictable members. He is willing to cross the line between conventional police procedure and immediate action whenever he believes innocent lives are at risk. After the supermarket incident, Cobra returns to the department where his methods once again become a subject of discussion. Some officers respect him because he gets results, while others believe his approach creates unnecessary danger. Cobra has little interest in defending his reputation. He knows what happens when criminals are given too much time to make decisions, and he has seen enough violence to trust his own instincts. His partner and fellow officers understand that beneath his tough personality is a strong commitment to protecting people. Cobra simply expresses that commitment differently from most police officers. Meanwhile, the mysterious criminal organization continues operating in the shadows. Its members are part of a movement that believes the existing social order should collapse. They are fascinated by violence and convinced that fear will eventually allow them to dominate weaker people. Their leader carefully selects targets and encourages members to prove themselves through increasingly brutal acts. The police initially have difficulty connecting the incidents because the group deliberately avoids leaving obvious evidence. What appears to be a series of unrelated murders is actually part of a larger campaign designed to spread terror and recruit people who share the organization's extremist worldview. One of the most important members of the investigation is a young woman named Brigitte Nielsen, a fashion model whose ordinary life is about to change completely. Ingrid witnessed a murder connected to the organization, unknowingly becoming the only person capable of identifying the killer. The criminals quickly realized the danger created by her testimony. If Ingrid reaches the police and survives long enough to describe what she saw, investigators could finally begin connecting the organization's activities to specific individuals. Her survival therefore becomes a serious threat to the entire criminal network. Ingrid is initially unaware of how much danger she is facing. She believes the murder she witnessed was simply a horrifying event that she happened to see, but the people responsible know exactly what she saw. They begin searching for her, using their connections and resources to locate her before the police can protect her. The organization understands that eliminating a witness is easier than allowing investigators to build a case. Ingrid's name soon becomes a priority, and the people hunting her are prepared to kill anyone who stands between them and their target. Cobra becomes involved when the police realize Ingrid is being targeted. He immediately recognizes that the situation is more serious than a normal witness protection case. The people searching for Ingrid have demonstrated unusual organization and a willingness to attack police officers. Cobra believes the witness must be moved and protected before the criminals can locate her. His aggressive approach again creates tension with other members of the department, but he refuses to underestimate the enemy. He understands that the criminals are not interested in negotiating and that every delay gives them another opportunity to find Ingrid. The investigation also brings Cobra into conflict with his superior officers, who want the case handled according to standard procedures. Cobra argues that conventional protection will not be enough because the enemy has already demonstrated the ability to locate and eliminate people connected to the investigation. His concerns are eventually justified when another attack reveals that the organization is operating much closer to the police than anyone expected. The criminals are not simply hiding in distant neighborhoods. They have information about police movements and appear capable of predicting how investigators will respond. Cobra begins suspecting that the organization may have access to information that should be confidential. As the investigation develops, Cobra and his partner begin examining the witness story in greater detail. Ingrid remembers the appearance of the killer and several details surrounding the murder, but the information must be handled carefully because revealing too much could expose her location. Cobra understands that the witness is frightened and unfamiliar with police procedures. Instead of treating her like a piece of evidence, he focuses on keeping her alive long enough for the investigation to reach the people responsible. His attitude toward Ingrid remains tough and sometimes impatient, but his actions repeatedly show that her safety has become his highest priority. The criminals, meanwhile, grow increasingly desperate. Their leader knows that the police are beginning to understand that the murders are connected. If Ingrid survives, the organization risks losing the secrecy that has protected it. The group therefore increases its efforts to find her, sending armed members into areas where she might be hiding. Their attacks become more aggressive, creating a chain of violence that forces Cobra to move Ingrid repeatedly. Every new location provides only temporary safety because the enemy seems determined to keep searching until the witness is dead. Cobra's reputation begins attracting attention from the criminals themselves. They learn that he is responsible for protecting Ingrid and realize that eliminating him could make their task easier. Rather than being intimidated, Cobra becomes even more determined. He has dealt with violent criminals throughout his career, but this organization is different because its members seem motivated by ideology rather than money alone. They are willing to sacrifice themselves and innocent people for a cause they believe will eventually transform society. Cobra understands that such enemies can be more dangerous than ordinary criminals because fear of death does not necessarily stop them. The investigation eventually confirms that the witness is not the only person in danger. Anyone who helps protect Ingrid becomes a potential target, including police officers and civilians. Cobra therefore decides that keeping her hidden within the normal protection system may be impossible. He begins planning a more unconventional strategy designed to separate Ingrid from the police network the criminals may be monitoring. The plan will require trust because Ingrid must follow Cobra's instructions, even when she does not understand why he is making certain decisions. The relationship begins as one of mutual suspicion, but the growing danger gradually forces them to depend upon each other. Cobra also starts understanding the larger objective behind the murders. The organization is not simply killing people randomly. Its members want to create fear powerful enough to make ordinary citizens believe society is collapsing. By attacking vulnerable targets and spreading violent images, they hope to convince others that traditional authorities cannot protect them. The murders therefore serve both practical and psychological purposes. Every victim becomes part of a message intended to frighten the public, while every surviving witness becomes a threat to the organization's secrecy. As Cobra investigates deeper, he recognizes that the criminals have chosen their targets carefully and that their activities may be connected to a larger recruitment network. The organization is attracting people who feel alienated from society and are willing to embrace violence as a solution. Their leader presents himself as someone who understands the anger of ordinary people, but behind that message is a simple desire for power. Cobra sees through the ideology because he understands what violence actually does to innocent people. To him, there is nothing revolutionary about murdering strangers. It is simply another form of cowardice hidden behind an excuse. The pressure increases when Cobra realizes the organization may be preparing to move against Ingrid directly. He refuses to wait for another attack and begins arranging a plan to move her somewhere the criminals will not expect. His superiors remain concerned about his methods, but the growing number of attacks makes it increasingly difficult to argue that standard procedures are working. Cobra knows the criminals are watching for predictable police behavior. If he follows every rule exactly as expected, he may lead them directly to Ingrid. His decision to operate outside the normal pattern becomes the only advantage he can create. By the end of the opening stage, Cobra has gone from investigating a series of violent incidents to protecting the most important witness connected to a dangerous criminal movement. Ingrid's survival could expose the organization and help the police identify its members, while her death will allow the criminals to continue operating in secrecy. The group has already shown that it will kill without hesitation, and its leader is determined to eliminate anyone capable of revealing the truth. Cobra now understands that protecting Ingrid will require more than police authority. He will have to anticipate an enemy that believes fear is its greatest weapon, while keeping one frightened witness alive long enough to bring the entire organization into the light. Cobra continues protecting Ingrid after realizing that the criminal organization is far more organized and dangerous than the police originally believed. The witness has become the central target of the investigation, and every movement she makes carries the possibility of exposing her location. Cobra understands that the criminals are patient enough to wait for a mistake, so he refuses to follow predictable procedures. He keeps Ingrid under close protection while attempting to determine how the organization is receiving information about police activity. The longer the investigation continues, the clearer it becomes that the enemy is not simply reacting to the police. They are anticipating them. Ingrid struggles to adjust to the sudden loss of her normal life. Only recently she was living as a successful model with no reason to believe that violent criminals will ever care about her existence. Now she cannot move freely, cannot trust strangers, and must constantly consider whether someone nearby may be watching her. Cobra's personality makes the situation even more difficult because he does not offer false reassurance. He tells her directly that the people hunting her are serious and that mistakes could cost her life. His blunt honesty frightens Ingrid, but it also helps her understand why following his instructions is necessary. Cobra's Pachna and the other officers working the case continue investigating the murders connected to the organization. Their work reveals more evidence of a coordinated movement rather than a collection of unrelated criminals. The suspects appear connected by the same violent philosophy and use similar methods when attacking their victims. Investigators begin mapping relationships between members, but identifying the people at the top remains difficult. The organization's structure is deliberately designed to protect its leadership. Lower-level members know only enough information to perform their assignments, while the people directing the operation remain hidden behind layers of secrecy. The criminal leader becomes increasingly concerned about the police investigation. He understands that ideology alone cannot protect the organization if investigators discover enough evidence to identify its members. Ingrid remains the biggest immediate threat because she can recognize one of the killers and potentially connect him to the movement. The leader therefore orders his followers to intensify their search. His instructions are clear. Ingrid must be found before she can provide useful information to the authorities. Anyone who interferes with the search is considered expendable, including members of the organization who fail to follow orders. Cobra notices that several attempts to locate Ingrid appear to happen immediately after police decisions are made. This convinces him that someone may be leaking information or that the criminals have developed methods of monitoring the department. Rather than openly accusing another officer without proof, he begins changing plans without informing everyone involved. His approach creates frustration among colleagues who want more communication, but Cobra understands that secrecy is necessary when the enemy may be listening. He deliberately gives different information to different people and watches to see which version reaches the criminals. The strategy produces useful results. When an apparently secure location becomes dangerous soon after a small group of officers learns about it, Cobra realizes that his suspicions were justified. The criminals are obtaining information from somewhere inside the system. He immediately changes the way Ingrid is moved and refuses to reveal her next destination. Ingrid initially becomes confused because she believes the constant changes mean Cobra does not know what he is doing. He explains that unpredictability is the only advantage they possess. If the enemy cannot predict where they will go, they cannot prepare an ambush. The relationship between Cobra and Ingrid gradually becomes more trusting. She begins recognizing that his harsh personality is largely a response to the kind of people he fights every day. Cobra rarely discusses his personal life, but his actions reveal a strong belief that innocent people should never be abandoned simply because protecting them is difficult. Ingrid starts following his instructions without arguing, even when they force her farther away from the life she knows. Their growing trust becomes important because Cobra cannot protect her every second. Eventually, Ingrid will have to make decisions for herself when circumstances separate them. The criminals launch another attack designed to test the police response. Armed men move into an area where they believe Ingrid may be located, expecting to find a predictable police perimeter. Cobra realizes what is happening before the attackers can complete their plan. He moves quickly, turning the criminals' attempt to ambush the witness into a confrontation with heavily armed officers. The attackers are determined and violent, refusing to surrender easily. Cobra responds with the same ruthless efficiency that made him famous inside the department, stopping the immediate threat before the criminals can reach Ingrid. The incident confirms that the organization has become willing to take increasingly dangerous risks. They no longer care whether their operations attract police attention, because eliminating Ingrid has become more important than maintaining secrecy. Cobra realizes this may actually create an opportunity. If the criminals are becoming impatient, they may eventually expose higher-ranking members while attempting to reach their target. Instead of simply hiding Ingrid indefinitely, Cobra begins considering how they might use the organization's desperation against it. A controlled movement could force the enemy to reveal itself, provided Cobra can maintain enough protection to keep Ingrid alive. Meanwhile, the criminal organization continues expanding its influence through fear. Its members believe that society is weak because ordinary people depend upon institutions for protection. They want to prove that police and government authority cannot keep citizens safe. Every attack is therefore designed to create a psychological effect beyond the immediate victims. The more frightened people become, the easier it is for the organization to recruit others who feel disconnected from society. Cobra understands that defeating individual members will not be enough if the ideology continues attracting new recruits. Cobra's superiors begin questioning whether his methods are becoming too aggressive. He has already ignored several conventional procedures and made decisions without waiting for complete authorization. Cobra argues that the criminals have already abandoned conventional rules, making predictable police behavior dangerous. His superiors are not entirely convinced, but the evidence surrounding the organization forces them to continue relying on him. Cobra has repeatedly predicted attacks before they happen, and his decisions have kept Ingrid alive. Whatever disagreements exist inside the department, nobody can deny that the investigation is progressing because of his instincts. The pressure on Cobra becomes personal when the criminals attempt to attack someone connected to the police investigation. Their objective is not merely to eliminate another witness. They want Cobra to understand that they can reach people around him whenever they choose. The message is designed to create fear and force him into making a reckless decision. Instead, Cobra becomes more determined. He realizes that the organization expects emotional reactions because its members use fear as a weapon. Refusing to give them the reaction they want becomes another way of taking control of the situation. Ingrid also begins understanding the importance of her testimony. At first, she wanted only to survive and return to her ordinary life. Now she recognizes that her survival could help stop the people responsible for the violence. She remains frightened, but fear no longer completely controls her decisions. Cobra never promises that everything will be safe, yet his confidence gives her the strength to continue. Their partnership develops into something more than a police officer protecting a witness. Both understand that the final outcome depends upon whether they can stay alive long enough to expose the organization. The investigation eventually reveals the existence of a major gathering connected to the criminals. Cobra suspects that the event could bring together important members of the organization and provide the police with a chance to identify people who have remained hidden. However, approaching the gathering directly could alert the entire group and put Ingrid in immediate danger. Cobra begins planning carefully, knowing that the criminals have enough weapons and manpower to turn a police operation into a massacre. He needs evidence, but he also needs to avoid allowing the organization to escape before the investigation can reach its leadership. At the same time, the criminal leader prepares his followers for a final campaign against the police. He knows Cobra has become the greatest obstacle to their plans and begins treating the officer as a personal enemy. His followers are encouraged to believe that eliminating Cobra will prove the superiority of their movement. Cobra, however, has no interest in becoming a symbol for either side. He simply wants the violence to end. His understanding of the organization has changed his original mission. Protecting Ingrid remains important, but stopping the people responsible for the murders has become equally necessary. The criminals eventually locate one of the places connected to Ingrid's protection. Cobra realizes the situation is becoming impossible to contain through defensive measures alone. Every safe location can eventually be compromised if the organization continues receiving information. He decides that the only remaining option is to move from defense to offense. Instead of waiting for the criminals to attack again, Cobra plans to identify their operating base and strike before they can organize another assault. The decision is extremely dangerous because he will be entering enemy territory rather than waiting behind police barriers. Cobra prepares himself and his equipment while maintaining his usual calm attitude. He knows that the coming operation may be one of the most dangerous of his career because the criminals are heavily armed and willing to die for their cause. Ingrid watches him prepare and understands that the man who has protected her is about to enter a situation where even his extraordinary instincts may not be enough. Cobra assures her that the goal is not revenge. The goal is to make sure the people hunting her never have the opportunity to threaten another innocent person. As Cobra moves closer to the organization's hidden network, the criminal leader realizes that the hunter has finally become the hunted. The organization expected police officers to remain trapped inside normal procedures, but Cobra has chosen to fight on his own terms. Their conflict is approaching a decisive stage where secrecy will no longer protect either side. Ingrid remains the key witness. The criminals remain determined to silence her, and Cobra stands between them with only his training and determination. The next confrontation will force the organization to reveal more of its strength than ever before. Cobra realizes that the investigation has reached a dangerous turning point. The criminal organization is no longer behaving like a group attempting to remain hidden. Its members are becoming more aggressive, more confident, and increasingly willing to attack police officers in order to reach Ingrid. Cobra understands that this change is not accidental. The organization knows that the witness is still alive and that the police are getting closer to understanding its structure. If Ingrid survives long enough to identify the killer she saw, the criminals could lose the secrecy that has protected them. Their desperation, therefore, makes them more dangerous than ever. The police continue gathering information about the movement, but the organization remains difficult to penetrate. Its members use different identities and rarely reveal the names of people higher in the hierarchy. Cobra studies every piece of evidence and begins recognizing a pattern in the attacks. The criminals are not simply trying to kill Ingrid. They are testing police reactions, measuring response times, and searching for weaknesses in the protection system. Every attack gives them information about how the authorities operate. Cobra realizes that the organization is learning from every mistake the police make, meaning the next operation must be unpredictable. Ingrid has become more confident since the beginning of the investigation, but the constant danger continues affecting her emotionally. She knows that people have died because they try to protect her, and that the criminals will continue searching until they are certain she is dead. Cobra refuses to let her believe that she is responsible for what is happening. He explains that the organization chose violence long before she witnessed the murder. Her testimony simply exposed something that was already there. Ingrid begins to understand that surviving is not selfish. If she remains alive, she can help prevent the criminals from hurting more people. Cobra and his fellow officers identify several locations connected to members of the organization. One of them appears to be an important meeting point where information is exchanged and instructions are distributed. Cobra believes the location could lead them closer to the group's leadership. However, attacking it without preparation could alert every member and allow the most important suspects to escape. He therefore decides to watch the location rather than immediately storm it. His patience surprises officers accustomed to his aggressive reputation. Cobra knows that sometimes the best way to catch violent criminals is to let them believe they are still in control. The surveillance reveals several armed men arriving separately and avoiding obvious communication. They appear disciplined and careful, confirming Cobra's belief that the organization is larger than the police initially suspected. Some members are clearly responsible for street-level violence, while others appear to have more authority. Cobra begins identifying the people who receive information and those who give orders. He understands that arresting the lower-level members will not end the threat. The organization will simply replace them. To destroy the movement, investigators must recouple directing it and understand how its recruitment and operations are organized. The criminal leader, meanwhile, learns that police surveillance may be approaching his network. He becomes furious because the organization was built around the belief that its members could operate without fear of discovery. He orders his followers to increase security and prepare for the possibility of a police assault. At the same time, he refuses to abandon the plan to eliminate Ingrid. In his mind, the witness represents both a practical threat and a symbolic challenge. If she survives, it proves that his movement can be resisted. If she dies, he believes his followers will see that even the police cannot protect someone marked for death. Cobra receives information that the criminals are preparing another attempt to locate Ingrid. Instead of moving her immediately, he decides to create a controlled situation that will make the attackers reveal themselves. The plan requires careful coordination because any mistake could expose Ingrid to genuine danger. Cobra explains the risks to his team and makes it clear that nobody should act unless absolutely necessary. His officers understand the danger but trust his judgment because previous operations have shown that he rarely takes unnecessary risks. His reputation for aggression sometimes hides how carefully he actually plans when innocent lives are involved. The criminals take the bait and begin moving toward the location they believe Ingrid is using. Cobra's team monitors the approach from concealed positions, allowing the suspects to move deeper into the controlled area. The attackers expect to find an easy target, protected by predictable police procedures, but instead they encounter officers positioned exactly where they need to be. Cobra waits until the criminals expose enough of their operation before giving the signal. The resulting confrontation is sudden and violent, leaving the attackers with little opportunity to escape. Several suspects are captured, providing investigators with new information about the organization. The arrests reveal that the movement has contacts throughout the city and that its members have been preparing for a much larger campaign. They are not satisfied with individual killings. Their ultimate goal is to create an atmosphere in which ordinary citizens believe the government and police are powerless. The criminals want people to become afraid of one another, convinced that violence can happen anywhere without warning. Cobra recognizes that this strategy explains why they have been so theatrical and brutal. The murders are designed not only to eliminate enemies, but also to communicate a message to the entire city. Cobra becomes increasingly determined to find the group's leader before the organization can launch its larger operation. He understands that every additional delay gives them more time to prepare. His superiors finally begin accepting that the threat is more serious than they first believed. The information obtained from the captured suspects supports Cobra's theory that the movement is organized around a central leadership structure. The department begins assigning additional resources to the investigation. But Cobra knows that a large police operation could also warn the criminals. He therefore continues relying on a smaller team capable of moving quickly. The situation becomes personal again when the organization discovers that several of its members have been captured. Their leader blames Cobra for the setbacks and decides to accelerate the campaign. Instead of waiting until every part of the plan is ready, he orders his followers to begin attacking sooner. His decision is partly motivated by fear that Cobra will identify the organization's headquarters. The leader believes that a sudden wave of violence will overwhelm the police and force them to retreat. He also hopes the chaos will provide another opportunity to reach Ingrid. Cobra recognizes the change in the criminals' behavior almost immediately. Their movements become less careful and attacks occur more frequently. Instead of seeing the increased violence as random, Cobra understands that it is evidence of desperation. The organization is under pressure and therefore making mistakes. He tells his team that this may be their best opportunity to locate the people at the top. If they can follow the criminals rather than simply reacting to attacks, they may finally discover where the leadership is hiding. The investigation shifts from protecting Ingrid alone to dismantling the entire network. Ingrid becomes an active part of the effort when she remembers additional details about the murder she witnessed. Certain movements, clothing, and locations that seem meaningless at the time now become useful clues. Cobra listens carefully and compares her memories with information already gathered from suspects. One detail points toward an area that investigators had previously overlooked. Ingrid realizes that her memory may be more important than she thought. She begins to see herself not simply as someone waiting to be rescued, but as someone capable of helping Cobra bring the criminals down. Cobra and his team investigate the new location and discover evidence confirming that the organization has used the area for planning and communication. The discovery provides a direct connection between the murder Ingrid witnessed and the larger movement. For the first time, investigators have enough information to begin identifying the leadership structure. Cobra knows the case could finally be approaching its conclusion, but he also understands that the criminals will react violently if they realize how much the police have discovered. The next move must therefore be made quickly before the organization can destroy evidence or disappear. The criminal leader prepares his own response by concentrating his remaining loyal followers around a secure location. He understands that Cobra is closing in and decides to turn the situation into a final confrontation. Rather than continuing to run, he wants to eliminate the police officer who has caused so many problems and prove that the movement cannot be destroyed by one man. His followers are heavily armed and prepared to defend their base. The location is chosen carefully, with multiple entrances, escape routes, and positions from which they can attack anyone approaching. Cobra receives enough information to determine where the criminals are gathering. He knows an assault will be extremely dangerous, but waiting could allow them to launch their larger campaign against the city. His superiors want a coordinated operation involving a large number of officers, But Cobra worries that too many people could alert the criminals before the police reach the location. He proposes a smaller tactical approach designed to surprise the organization and prevent its members from escaping. The plan is approved because the evidence now indicates that the criminal base represents an immediate threat. Before leaving, Cobra checks on Ingrid and makes sure she understands that the operation may take time. She asks whether he is confident he will return. Cobra does not make promises he cannot guarantee, but his calm response reassures her. He tells her that the criminals have spent too long believing they control the situation. Now the police are coming for them. Ingrid realizes that Cobra is not motivated by hatred alone. He wants the people responsible for the violence to understand that their victims are not powerless and that fear cannot continue protecting them. The final preparations begin as Cobra and his team move toward the criminals' stronghold. Darkness provides cover while the officers approach carefully, avoiding patrols and surveillance positions. Every step is calculated because a single mistake could trigger a firefight before they are ready. Cobra leads from the front, moving with the confidence that comes from years of experience. He knows the enemy is expecting an attack but does not know exactly when or where it will begin. That uncertainty gives Cobra the advantage he has been searching for since the investigation started. Inside the stronghold, the criminals prepare their weapons and wait. Their leader remains convinced that Cobra will eventually make a mistake because he sees the police officer as a man driven by anger rather than discipline. He does not understand that Cobra's greatest strength is his ability to remain calm while everyone around him becomes emotional. The organization has built its entire strategy around creating fear and forcing people to react impulsively. Cobra's refusal to panic makes him unusually difficult to control. The leader is about to discover that the police officer he underestimated has already studied the organization more carefully than anyone realizes. As Cobra reaches the outer defenses, the atmosphere changes. The investigation that began with a witness to a single murder has now led directly to the heart of the criminal movement. Ingrid remains alive. The police have identified important members of the organization, and the leader's location is finally known. But the criminals are heavily armed and prepared for a final battle. Cobra understands that the coming confrontation will determine whether the organization survives or collapses. He signals his team to move forward, knowing that there may be no second chance once the first shot is fired. Cobra has transformed the investigation from a defensive operation into a direct assault against the criminal movement. Ingrid's testimony has provided crucial information, captured members have exposed parts of the organization structure, and Cobra has finally located the central group responsible for the violence. The criminals are preparing for their strongest response yet, while Cobra and his team are positioned outside their stronghold. The enemy believes it has prepared a trap for the police, but Cobra knows the real battle is about to begin. The final confrontation will decide whether fear continues controlling the city or whether the organization responsible for the violence is finally destroyed. The final assault begins as Cobra and his team move toward the criminal organization's heavily defended stronghold. The darkness gives the officers a temporary advantage, allowing them to approach without immediately revealing their full strength. Cobra knows that the criminals have prepared for an attack and that their leader is likely watching every possible entrance. He therefore avoids rushing forward and studies the positions of the guards before making his move. Every decision is designed to prevent the enemy from turning the assault into a chaotic firefight that could place innocent people in danger. Inside the compound, the criminals begin realizing that something is wrong. The usual sense of security disappears as communication between several positions suddenly becomes silent. Guards search the surrounding area, trying to determine whether the police are actually approaching or whether someone has made a mistake. The organization's leader remains calm at first, convinced that his men can defeat a small police team. He orders additional guards into position and prepares the compound for a direct confrontation. He believes the fortress gives him enough protection to survive anything Cobra can throw at him. Cobra's team finally begins moving through the outer defenses. The first confrontation is sudden, with armed criminals attempting to stop the officers before they can reach the central buildings. Cobra responds immediately, using controlled bursts and precise movement to eliminate the immediate threats. His team advances behind him while maintaining enough discipline to avoid becoming separated. The criminals expected a conventional police assault, but Cobra's tactics are faster and more aggressive than they anticipated. The outer defenses begin collapsing before the organization can fully coordinate its response. The noise of the fighting spreads through the compound, alerting everyone inside that the police have arrived. Criminals rush toward defensive positions while others search for escape routes. The organization's leadership ordered them to hold the perimeter, but panic begins spreading among the lower-ranking members. Many join the movement because they believe its leaders could protect them. Now, they see armed police officers entering the compound despite all the defenses that were supposed to make it impossible. The belief that the organization is untouchable begins disappearing. Cobra continues advancing with his team, refusing to allow the criminals time to reorganize. He knows that every additional minute gives them an opportunity to destroy evidence, move important leaders, or escape through hidden roads. The officers clear one section after another while maintaining communication. Cobra's experience allows him to recognize defensive patterns quickly. When the criminals concentrate their forces at one entrance, he shifts the attack elsewhere, forcing them to divide their manpower. His objective is not simply to overpower them, but to break the structure protecting their leadership. The criminal leader becomes furious when reports confirm that Cobra has entered the compound. He orders his strongest fighters to stop the advance personally. These men are more disciplined than the guards at the outer perimeter, and understand that surrender will likely expose their involvement in the organization's crimes. They establish positions inside the main building and wait for Cobra's team. The confrontation becomes extremely dangerous because the officers are moving through narrow spaces where the criminals can attack from concealed positions. Cobra moves carefully through the building, checking each area before allowing his team to advance. The criminals attempt to ambush the officers from behind doors and corridors, but Cobra anticipates many of their movements. His aggressive reputation is useful because enemies often expect him to charge directly into danger. Instead, he uses patience when necessary, forcing the criminals to expose themselves. One by one, their defensive positions collapse as Cobra and his team continue pushing toward the center of the compound. Outside, additional police units begin securing the surrounding area to prevent anyone from escaping. The larger operation is now fully underway, making it difficult for the criminals to flee without being detected. Some members attempt to abandon the organization and surrender, while others remain loyal to their leader and continue fighting. The difference reveals how fragile the movement actually is. Its members claim to believe in a powerful ideology, but when faced with the consequences of their actions, many are more concerned with saving themselves than protecting the organization. Cobra reaches a room containing evidence linking the organization to several of the murders under investigation. Documents, photographs, weapons, and other materials provide investigators with the proof they have been searching for. Cobra immediately understands the importance of preserving the evidence. The criminals cannot be allowed to destroy it during the fighting. He orders officers to secure the area while the rest of the team continues toward the leadership section. For the first time, Cobra knows that even if some suspects escape, the organization can no longer completely erase the truth. The criminal leader receives word that evidence has been discovered and becomes increasingly desperate. He understands that his empire is collapsing. His carefully protected identity is no longer secure, and the police now possess information capable of connecting his followers to the violence. He orders his remaining men to create distractions and attack the officers from multiple directions. His goal is no longer to protect the entire organization. He simply wants enough time to escape before Cobra reaches him. Cobra recognizes the pattern and realizes the leader is preparing to flee. He changes direction immediately and begins moving toward the most likely escape route. His team follows while other officers continue securing the compound. The criminal leader has prepared several possible exits, but the surrounding police units have already blocked most of them. He finds himself trapped inside the very fortress that once made him feel untouchable. The organization that protected him has become a prison because every route out is now controlled by law enforcement. Meanwhile, Ingrid remains under protection away from the main assault. She waits anxiously for news, knowing that Cobra has entered the most dangerous part of the operation. Her thoughts return to the moment she first witnessed the murder and how completely her life changed afterward. She realizes that the nightmare may finally be ending. The criminals who hunted her are being confronted directly, and the man who refused to abandon her is risking his life to make sure they cannot continue. Cobra's team reaches another section of the compound where several heavily armed members attempt one final defense. The fighting becomes intense, but the officers maintain their discipline. Cobra moves through the chaos with the same determination he displayed throughout the investigation. He knows that the enemy's strength is weakening, and he refuses to give them a chance to recover. The remaining criminals are gradually forced backward until only the organization's most loyal defenders remain between Cobra and their leader. The leader eventually realizes that he has no realistic way to defeat the police. Instead of surrendering immediately, he chooses to make one final attempt to escape. He moves through a concealed passage leading toward the outer part of the compound, believing the darkness will allow him to disappear before Cobra can catch him. What he does not know is that Cobra has already anticipated the possibility of a hidden route. The police have blocked the surrounding area, and the leader emerges directly into the path of the officers. Cobra confronts him at close range. For the first time, the criminal leader who spent the entire story believing he could control everyone else is forced to face someone who cannot be intimidated by him. He attempts to use threats and confidence to regain control, but Cobra refuses to engage in unnecessary conversation. The officer knows exactly what this man has done and understands that allowing him another opportunity to manipulate the situation would be dangerous. The leader's power has disappeared because his followers, money, weapons, and secrecy are no longer enough to protect him. The final struggle becomes a direct physical confrontation. The criminal leader fights desperately because he knows capture will expose the entire organization. Cobra responds with overwhelming determination, using his training and strength to prevent the man from escaping. The battle is brutal and close, but Cobra ultimately gains the advantage. The leader is defeated, and the organization loses the person who coordinated its activities and inspired its followers to commit violence. His capture marks the moment when the criminal movement's power finally begins to collapse. With the leader under control, the remaining criminals lose their motivation to continue fighting. Some surrender while others attempt to flee, but the police have already secured the surrounding area. The compound is gradually brought under control, evidence is collected, weapons are secure, and investigators begin documenting the organization's activities. The police now have the material needed to connect the murders, attacks, and recruitment operations into a single case. The investigation that once seemed almost impossible has finally reached the people responsible. Cobra returns to the area where his team is gathering after the final confrontation. Although exhausted, he remains focused on making sure every remaining suspect is accounted for. His colleagues recognize that the operation succeeded largely because he refused to allow fear or anger to control his decisions. Cobra's aggressive methods created controversy throughout the investigation, but the outcome demonstrates why he trusted his instincts. The criminals were not defeated simply because the police had more weapons. They were defeated because Cobra understood how they thought and refused to let them dictate the conditions of the confrontation. News of the operation spreads quickly through the department. Officers who previously questioned Cobra's methods begin recognizing the scale of what his team accomplished. The criminal organization that had frightened witnesses and challenged police authority has been broken apart. Its leader is captured, its base is under police control, and evidence is being prepared for prosecution. The city is still dealing with the consequences of the violence, but the immediate threat has been removed. Cobra knows that stopping one organization will not eliminate every criminal in Los Angeles, but he also knows that fear becomes weaker whenever someone is willing to confront it. Ingrid is eventually informed that the operation has succeeded. The people who hunted her are no longer in control, and she can finally begin imagining a return to ordinary life. The experience has changed her permanently, but she has also gained confidence she did not possess at the beginning. Cobra's protection gave her the opportunity to survive, while her testimony gave investigators the information necessary to identify the criminals. Their partnership has therefore played an important role in bringing the organization down, even though neither expected to become connected in such a dangerous way. Cobra understands that the case is not completely finished until the evidence is processed and the remaining suspects are brought before the courts. He has no interest in celebrating prematurely. Criminal organizations can sometimes survive through smaller groups even after their leaders are arrested. However, the structure created by the leader has been severely damaged, and the members no longer have the secrecy or confidence that once protected them. The movement's greatest weapon, fear, has been turned against itself. Its followers now understand that the police can reach them. As the night begins giving way to morning, the atmosphere surrounding the city slowly changes. The immediate danger that had followed Ingrid and the police throughout the investigation is finally gone. Cobra looks over the aftermath, knowing that there will always be another dangerous criminal waiting somewhere in Los Angeles. His work will not end with this case. Yet, the operation has reinforced the principle that guides him. When innocent people are threatened, someone must be willing to stand between them and the violence. The criminal leader is taken away under police custody, surrounded by officers who once seemed powerless to reach him. His empire of fear has collapsed in a single night. The weapons, money, and hidden locations that once gave him confidence have become evidence against him. Cobra watches without celebration because he understands that justice is not about revenge. The important thing is that the people he endangered will have the opportunity to live without being hunted by his organization. The major confrontation has been won. Cobra and his team have penetrated the organization's stronghold, secured crucial evidence, defeated its armed defenders, and captured the leader responsible for the campaign of violence. Ingrid is safe. The police finally have enough evidence to pursue the organization through the legal system, and the criminals' belief in their own invincibility has been destroyed. But Cobra knows that the work of protecting the city never truly ends. The battle may be over for now, yet his life as a police officer means another threat will eventually appear, waiting for someone like Cobra to step forward and face it. With the criminal organization Battery Damage, Cobra and his fellow officers begin securing the evidence recovered from the stronghold. Weapons, documents, photographs, communication records, and other material are carefully collected because the prosecution will need to establish exactly how the organization operated. Several suspects are taken into custody and questioned about their roles, revealing additional connections between the murders and the wider movement. Cobra remains focused despite the long night, knowing that capturing the leader is only part of the job. If the evidence is handled properly, the organization will not simply disappear and return under another name. The officers understand that dismantling the network completely will require patience, careful investigation, and continued protection for everyone who helped expose it. Ingrid is finally allowed to breathe without constantly looking over her shoulder. For days, every unfamiliar vehicle and every unexpected sound had made her wonder whether the criminals had found her again. Now, the people responsible for hunting her are either captured or fleeing, and the police have control of the evidence that can expose them. She remains emotionally exhausted from everything that happened, but she also feels stronger than she did when Cobra first took responsibility for protecting her. The experience has changed her understanding of fear. She knows now that fear can be overcome when someone refuses to surrender to it. Her survival has also given investigators the testimony needed to connect the organization with the crimes that once seemed impossible to solve. Cobra returns to the department as the investigation begins receiving widespread attention. Officers who once considered his methods too aggressive now recognize that his instincts were responsible for preventing several attacks and keeping Ingrid alive. Cobra does not seek praise or recognition. He considers the operation part of his responsibility and believes that protecting civilians is what police officers are supposed to do. His superiors still have concerns about some of his decisions, particularly the risks he took during the final assault, but even they acknowledge that the results speak for themselves. Cobra's reputation inside the department becomes stronger than before. He remains unchanged, however, understanding that another dangerous situation could appear without warning and require him to act just as decisively again. As investigators examine the recovered material, they discover that the organization was larger than the officers originally understood. Names of suspected members appear throughout the documents, along with meeting locations, financial information, photographs, and records of previous activities. Some of the criminals who escaped the stronghold may still be dangerous, especially those who believe the movement can be rebuilt. Cobra warns his colleagues not to assume that capturing the leadership automatically ends the threat. Criminal organizations often survive by dividing into smaller groups and changing their methods. The police therefore begin tracking the remaining suspects while Cobra focuses on information that could identify those who held positions above the people already arrested. The investigation continues, even though the most violent confrontation has ended. The department receives reports that several members of the organization are attempting to disappear from Los Angeles. Some abandon their vehicles and move between temporary locations, while others contact people who can provide false identities or transportation. Cobra knows that desperate criminals can become more unpredictable when they realize the police are closing in. He recommends concentrating on the suspects most likely to possess important information about the leadership. Arresting every minor participant at once could overwhelm investigators and allow more important targets to escape. His approach is based on understanding how the organization functioned. If the police follow the strongest connections first, they may be able to dismantle the remaining network before another leader has the opportunity to take control. Ingrid begins cooperating more closely with investigators as they review everything she remembers about the organization. Certain details that seem insignificant during the first interviews now become useful when compared with the evidence recovered from the stronghold. She identifies locations, recognizes descriptions, and confirms information about the people she saw around the murder. Although revisiting those memories is difficult, Ingrid understands that her testimony can prevent the criminals from rewriting what happened. Cobra does not pressure her unnecessarily, allowing investigators to work at a pace she can handle. Her courage becomes an important part of the case because the organization depended upon witnesses remaining silent. Ingrid's decision to speak has helped turn their secrecy into evidence. The captured members begin revealing more information as investigators question them. Some attempt to protect themselves by blaming the organization's leaders, while others remain loyal and refuse to cooperate. Cobra pays attention to the differences between their stories, knowing that criminals often reveal useful information when they believe they can reduce their own punishment. Investigators compare each statement with the physical evidence recovered from the compound. Slowly, a clearer picture emerges, showing how the organization recruited members, assigned targets, and communicated with different groups. The investigation is becoming stronger with every confirmed detail. What once looked like an unexplained series of violent incidents can now be presented as part of a coordinated criminal campaign with identifiable participants and leadership. Cobra remains aware that the emotional consequences of the case will last much longer than the official investigation. Ingrid has survived, but she has experienced violence that cannot simply disappear because the criminals have been arrested. Cobra understands this because his own career has exposed him to situations that remain in his memory long after the immediate danger ends. He does not try to tell Ingrid that everything will suddenly become normal. Instead, he encourages her to move forward at her own pace and reminds her that she is no longer alone. The people who hunted her have lost their power, and she now has the freedom to decide what kind of life she wants after the nightmare finally ends. The department also begins reviewing the failures that allowed the organization to operate for so long. Investigators question how the criminals obtain information about police movements and whether additional contacts inside official systems help them avoid detection. Cobra's earlier suspicions about information leaks receive renewed attention. Officers examine communications, schedules, and previous cases to determine whether sensitive information was deliberately exposed. The review is uncomfortable because it suggests that the organization may have benefited from weaknesses inside the system. Cobra believes the department must learn from those failures rather than simply celebrate the arrest. If the same weaknesses remain, another criminal group could eventually exploit them and create a new threat just as dangerous as the one they have finally defeated. As the evidence continues being processed, Cobra visits the areas affected by the organization's violence. Streets that once seemed ordinary now carry memories of attacks and fear. People are beginning to return to their normal routines, but many still remember the uncertainty created by the murders. Cobra observes quietly, understanding that successful police work is not measured only by arrests or headlines. The real result is the return of ordinary life for people who are afraid to walk outside or trust strangers. He knows that most civilians will never learn every detail of the operation, and that is acceptable. His job is not to become famous. His job is to make sure people can live without constantly wondering who might be waiting for them in the shadows. The criminal leader's arrest also changes the behavior of those who once supported him. People who fear retaliation now feel more willing to cooperate with investigators. Information begins arriving from witnesses who previously remained silent because they believed the organization would always survive. Cobra understands how important this change is. Fear protected the criminals more effectively than their weapons did. Once people realize that the organization can actually be defeated, its influence begins disappearing rapidly. Former associates start distancing themselves from the movement, while investigators receive new leads that could result in additional arrests. Cobra sees the process as another form of victory because destroying a criminal network requires breaking the belief that its power is permanent. Ingrid eventually begins considering what she wants to do after the investigation ends. Her career and public life were interrupted suddenly, and she knows returning to exactly the same routine may not be possible. Yet she also refuses to allow the criminals to determine the rest of her life. Cobra's protection has shown her that strength does not always mean fighting physically. Sometimes, strength means continuing forward after something has tried to destroy your sense of safety. She becomes more comfortable speaking with investigators and answering questions, knowing that every detail can help ensure the criminals face consequences. Her fear has not completely disappeared, but it no longer controls every decision she makes. Cobra's relationship with his colleagues also changes after the operation. Some officers who previously kept their distance begin treating him with greater respect, recognizing that his unusual methods were supported by a strong understanding of criminal behavior. Cobra does not suddenly become interested in following every traditional procedure, but he does listen more carefully when other officers offer useful information. The operation has reminded him that even the most experienced officer cannot work alone. His success depended upon the people who secured evidence, protected Ingrid, monitored suspects, and followed his instructions during the assault. Cobra remains the most visible figure in the operation, but he understands that the result belongs to everyone who helped bring the organization down. The legal process begins moving forward as prosecutors prepare the case against the captured criminals. The evidence recovered from the stronghold provides investigators with material capable of supporting multiple charges, while Ingrid's testimony strengthens the connection between the organization and the murders. Cobra is asked to provide reports about the operation and explain decisions made during the most dangerous moments. He answers directly, refusing to exaggerate his achievements or hide the risks involved. His superiors understand that some of his actions were unconventional, but the documentation shows that he consistently acted to protect civilians and his fellow officers. The case now moves from the streets into the courts, where the criminals must face the consequences of their actions. Meanwhile, the remaining members of the organization realize that their former leader can no longer protect them. Some attempt to leave the city, while others begin destroying personal connections that could expose them. Investigators track these movements carefully, using the information gathered from the captured suspects to predict where fugitives might go. Cobra remains available to assist when necessary, but he no longer needs to chase every lead personally. The investigation has grown beyond one officer's ability to control, becoming a coordinated effort involving detectives, prosecutors, and other law enforcement agencies. For Cobra, this is a sign that the case has reached a different stage. The organization is no longer hunting the police. Now the police are systematically hunting the organization. The city slowly begins recovering from the fear created by the criminal movement. News reports focus on the arrests and the evidence discovered during the operation, while residents begin discussing the possibility that the threat has finally ended. Cobra remains cautious because he knows criminals do not disappear simply because the public stops talking about them. Still, he recognizes that the atmosphere has changed. People who once looked over their shoulders now move more freely, and businesses that closed early because of fear begin returning to normal schedules. These small changes matter to Cobra because they demonstrate what the investigation was really protecting. The purpose was never simply to defeat one group of criminals. It was to restore the sense of safety they had tried to destroy. Ingrid eventually meets Cobra again after the most intense part of the investigation has passed. Their conversation is quieter than their earlier encounters because neither needs to discuss the immediate danger anymore. Ingrid thanks him for refusing to abandon her when protecting her became increasingly difficult. Cobra responds in his usual restrained manner, telling her that he was simply doing his job. She understands that he means it. To Cobra, protecting someone from criminals is not a favor deserving praise. It is a responsibility. Their brief conversation reflects how much both have changed. Ingrid is no longer simply a frightened witness, while Cobra has been reminded that behind every investigation are real people whose lives can be permanently changed by violence. Cobra eventually returns to his normal duties, knowing that the city will not remain peaceful forever. The streets continue producing new crimes, new suspects, and new situations requiring immediate decisions. He checks his equipment, prepares for another shift, and moves forward without dwelling on the recognition he received after the case. The criminal organization may have been one of the most dangerous threats he has faced, but Cobra understands that his work cannot be measured by one victory. There will always be people willing to exploit fear for money, power, or ideology. His responsibility remains the same: recognize the threat, protect innocent people, and confront violent criminals before they have another opportunity to control the city. The final stage of the investigation begins as prosecutors organize the evidence gathered from the criminal stronghold and prepare the captured members for trial. The documents recovered by Cobra's team reveal the scale of the organization's activities and help investigators connect individual suspects to specific crimes. Witness statements, photographs, communications records, and physical evidence strengthen the case against the people who once believed they could operate without consequences. Cobra is called upon to confirm details about the raid and explain how the evidence was recovered. He remains straightforward throughout the process, understanding that careful documentation is just as important as the dangerous work that brought the criminals into custody. Ingrid slowly begins rebuilding the ordinary routine that disappeared when she became a target of the organization. She returns to familiar places, reconnects with people she trusts, and starts thinking about her future without constantly expecting another attack. The experience has left permanent memories, but she refuses to allow those memories to define everything that comes next. She understands that the criminals wanted fear to control her decisions, and surviving their attempts to silence her has given her a new sense of confidence. Whenever she remembers the night that changed her life, she also remembers that she chose to cooperate with the police instead of remaining silent, helping expose the people responsible. Cobra continues working despite the conclusion of the major investigation. The department still has numerous cases requiring attention, and he knows that criminals rarely disappear simply because one dangerous organization has been defeated. His colleagues now understand his methods better, recognizing that his aggressive personality comes from an intense determination to prevent innocent people from being harmed. Cobra does not become softer or suddenly abandon the principles that made him effective, but the experience reinforces the importance of trusting his team. During the investigation, every officer had played a role in protecting Ingrid and dismantling the organization. Cobra realizes that even the strongest individual becomes more effective when surrounded by people willing to stand beside him. The department's review eventually confirms that the criminals had exploited weaknesses in the way information was handled. Sensitive details about police movements had reached people who should never have known them, allowing the organization to anticipate several operations. Investigators begin changing procedures and limiting access to confidential information so another criminal group cannot use the same witnesses. Cobra supports the changes because he understands that defeating criminals requires more than reacting to their attacks. Law enforcement must constantly adapt when enemies discover new methods. The organization believed that police routines could be predicted and manipulated, but the investigation ultimately proved that disciplined officers could recognize those weaknesses and use them to their advantage. The captured members face a very different future from the one they imagined when they joined the organization. Many believed that violence would give them power and that fear would make them untouchable. Instead, they now sit in custody while investigators examine every part of their criminal history. Some attempt to cooperate in exchange for reduced punishment, revealing information about other members who remain outside the authorities' reach. Others refuse to speak because they still believe loyalty will protect them. Cobra is not surprised by either reaction. He has seen criminals change their stories when survival becomes more important than ideology. And he knows that the strongest evidence must come from facts rather than promises. Several remaining suspects are eventually located through information obtained during the investigation. Police teams move quickly to prevent them from escaping before charges can be filed. Cobra assists when his experience is needed, but the operation is now larger than the original mission. Detectives have learned how the organization communicated, where its members operated, and which people were most important to its structure. One arrest leads to another as the network continues unraveling. The criminals who once appeared to be part of an unstoppable movement now seem increasingly isolated. Without their central leadership and the fear that once protected them, they are forced to depend upon mistakes, false identities, and desperate attempts to disappear. The public gradually learns more about the criminal organization and the danger it represented. News reports describe the arrests, the recovered evidence, and the efforts of investigators to bring the remaining members to justice. For many residents, the story explains violent incidents that previously seemed unrelated. People who had wondered why the city felt increasingly unsafe now understand that a coordinated group had been deliberately spreading fear. Cobra avoids media attention whenever possible. He does not consider himself a hero and has no interest in turning the investigation into a personal story. His satisfaction comes from knowing that the criminals who threatened innocent people can no longer operate with the same freedom they once enjoyed. Ingrid's experience also changes the way she views her own strength. At the beginning of the investigation, she depended almost entirely on Cobra and the police because she was frightened and unsure what to do. By the end, she understands that courage does not mean feeling no fear. It means continuing to act despite fear. She gave investigators information when remaining silent would have been easier, endured repeated attempts to locate her, and trusted Cobra when the situation became dangerous. Those choices helped bring the organization down. Although she knows the memories will remain with her, she no longer sees herself only as a victim. She has survived something terrible and emerged with greater confidence in her ability to face whatever comes next. Cobra and his partner eventually discuss the case after most of the immediate work has been completed. They remember how impossible the situation seemed when the investigation first began, and how quickly everything changed once Ingrid became the key witness. The operation had demanded long hours, difficult decisions, and constant awareness of danger. Yet the result proved that persistence could eventually overcome an enemy that appeared stronger because it operated through secrecy. Cobra remains realistic about what happened. He knows the organization was unusually dangerous, but he also knows criminals often create an exaggerated image of their own power. Once that image is challenged, their authority can collapse surprisingly quickly. The relationship between Cobra and Ingrid ends on a quieter note as the two go their separate ways. Their connection was created by circumstances neither expected, beginning with fear and danger and eventually developing into mutual respect. Ingrid knows that Cobra will continue facing dangerous criminals because that is the life he has chosen. Cobra knows that Ingrid deserves the chance to build a future that is not defined by the organization that once hunted her. Neither needs to make dramatic promises. Their experience has already created a bond based on trust and survival. Ingrid walks away knowing she is finally free, while Cobra returns to the responsibilities waiting for him at the department. The city itself begins settling back into its normal rhythm as the immediate threat disappears. Police patrols continue, businesses remain open, and residents gradually stop discussing the organization that had dominated the news. The streets are not suddenly free of crime, but the specific danger that had created such widespread fear has been removed. Cobra observes these changes without expecting recognition. He understands that successful police work often produces an invisible result. When officers do their jobs properly, people simply return to their ordinary lives without knowing how close danger once came. For Cobra, that quiet return to normality is more meaningful than any ceremony or public praise could ever be. The case also leaves Cobra with a deeper understanding of how criminals use fear to control people. The organization had convinced its followers that violence made them powerful, while convincing its victims that resistance was useless. Cobra's response challenged both beliefs. He showed that fear can be confronted through preparation, discipline, and determination. The criminals possessed weapons, numbers, and information, but those advantages became less important when their opponents refused to panic. Cobra knows another group may eventually attempt the same strategy, but he is prepared to recognize the warning signs. The lessons from the investigation will remain with him long after the names of the criminals disappear from public memory. As the final legal proceedings move forward, the evidence gathered during the operation becomes the foundation for holding the organization's members accountable. Prosecutors work through the complicated network of crimes, while investigators continue confirming individual responsibilities. The process is slower than the action on the streets, but Cobra understands why it matters. A violent arrest may stop a criminal temporarily, but a strong case can keep dangerous people from returning to the streets. The criminals once believed that money, secrecy, and intimidation could protect them forever. Now they face a system that has collected enough evidence to challenge those protections. Cobra considers that outcome a more lasting victory than simply defeating them in a firefight. Cobra eventually receives another assignment, signaling that his life has already begun moving forward. He studies the information, prepares his equipment, and gets ready to return to the streets. There is no dramatic celebration waiting for him, and no guarantee that the next case will be easier. That does not matter. Cobra has accepted that his profession means stepping toward danger when other people are trying to escape it. The organization he fought has been broken, but the city still contains criminals capable of creating new threats. He remains ready because his purpose has never depended on one particular enemy. His responsibility is to protect people whenever violence places their lives in danger. Before leaving, Cobra briefly reflects on everything that happened with Ingrid and the investigation. He remembers the fear on her face when she first became aware that the criminals were hunting her and compares it to the confidence she showed when the danger finally ended. That change reminds him why his work matters. Police officers cannot prevent every tragedy, but they can give people a chance to survive when circumstances become overwhelming. Cobra has always understood that principle, even when his methods made others uncomfortable. The case has simply reinforced it. He walks away from the investigation, knowing that the people he protected can continue their lives because he refused to allow the criminals to decide their fate. The criminal organization that once believed it could control the city through violence is now scattered, exposed, and facing the consequences of its actions. Its leader has lost the authority that made his followers afraid to resist, while the evidence collected by Cobra's team prevents the remaining members from easily rebuilding what was destroyed. Ingrid is safe, the police have strengthened their procedures, and the public has regained confidence after a period of uncertainty. The victory does not mean crime has disappeared, but it proves that even an organization built around fear can be challenged. Cobra's determination has helped turn a dangerous investigation into a lasting defeat for the criminals who believe nobody could stop them. Morning arrives over Los Angeles as Cobra prepares to begin another ordinary day in an extraordinary profession. The city continues moving around him, unaware of how many decisions and sacrifices were required to restore the sense of safety people now take for granted. Cobra does not expect gratitude, because he sees protecting others as part of the responsibility he accepted when he became a police officer. The previous night may have ended one of the most dangerous cases he has faced, but it has not changed who he is. He remains the same determined officer, willing to confront violent criminals when others hesitate, carrying the lessons of the past into whatever dangerous situation waits for him next.